Okay, welcome to the PSC Colloquium. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you Amelie Constant. Amelie has recently become one of us, and she's a research affiliate of the Population Studies Center. She had a very active research career before coming to Penn. She was a visiting research professor at Princeton University, connected to the Public Policy School. She was also program director of migration at ESA, and she's also the co-founding editor of the ESA Journal of Migration. Actually, she has had a very active professional life. Amelie's expertise lies in the area of migration and its connection with economic processes, including health, education, and well-being. She has published extensively on the topic in the most prestigious journals in the field. She brings more of a business economic perspective to the research on migration, more directly connecting population movements with the business cycle and economic decisions. She's an applied labor economist, and so she connects migration dynamics to economic processes, including wages. She has a very active professional presence. She's associate editor of the Journal of Migration and Society, and in 2013 she was elected foreign member of the European Academy of Sciences for her outstanding achievements as a researcher. She maintains a wide range of international collaboration. It's a great pleasure to have her join the PSC this past year, and actually have her here today to present her work. So please help me welcome Amelie Constant.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me. It's really great to be here. And this is a new project. It's not published anywhere. It's still in the works. And I'm excited to present it here. Hopefully I will get good, strong criticism to help us go along and perfect our paper. So, as the title says, we're looking at economic theories to explain emigration or out-migration of immigrants from the host country. And this is co-authored work with Astrid Cisse. I should use this for forward. From the National Institutes of Health in Norway, and Marianne Tønnesen from Oslo Metropolitan University. So this study, as the title already said, is about testing a couple of migration theories. I should say in parentheses that I would love to test other theories, like, sociology theories or political science theories, or, like networks and things like that. Unfortunately, when I will talk about the data, you will realize I do not have any of the variables that are required to test other theories. So I'm sticking to, what I have. So the general question is if these economic theories that exist for a century or so are still able to explain the real world in the 21st century from on emigration from a high income country like Norway. So we employ data from Norway to examine the characteristics of first-generation immigrants who live in Norway and decide to exit, to go somewhere else, either to return or to go to a third country. And we compare the characteristics of these people to the stayers, the first-generation immigrant who stay. In other words, we try to answer questions like, who are the immigrants who leave, what are the characteristics, and compare several different groups. Like we separate Nordic immigrants. Nordic immigrants means other immigrants from other Scandinavian countries that are neighboring Norway, like Sweden or Finland or Denmark, who are special because they share a lot of commonalities. That their languages, especially with Sweden, the language is practically the same. The cultures are similar. They're very close to each other geographically, etc. And of course, we touch upon a philosophical question, and the question is if if, say, we find out that the theories do not apply to this data we're using in the 21st century for Norway, or in general, is it good to continue using theories when the theories cannot interpret or cannot really explain the real world? So why we study emigration? One thing is that emigration from a host country is a rather more recent phenomenon. Research started in the late 70s, and the first oil crisis triggered that. We saw a lot of return migration, especially from Europe, pertaining to the so-called guest workers. And research has shown that it's, depending on the host country, return migration could be quite big. Could be between 20 to 60 to 75%, especially among the newcomers, because usually, within the first years, the first 5 years after arrival, immigrants decide, to go back or not. And for onward migration, research started even later. We had, a permanent problem is data, but in the 90s, some studies emerged studying onward migration, and they found that it's also quite a bit, ranging from 20 to 66%. An interesting study by Chalar and others, Ogden, I think. So he showed that actually in the US, 15% of the high-skilled immigrants were onward immigrants or transit immigrants who came from other countries. So transit immigrants sometimes means that there are immigrants who always wanted to come to the US, but they couldn't directly come for several reasons. So they had to, go for some years and stay either, in Canada, or they would go to the UK or to Australia, or, So until time comes, say, they change citizenship or things are easier and they can come to the US. So having this knowledge about the characteristics of the people who emigrate is really important for the countries, the host countries, the home countries, the third countries who are dealing with population shifts, especially if we have strong selection and say a particular group of people decides to leave a country. In addition, for research, it's important to know if there is selection and who are the people who exit, because this has serious ramifications on assimilation studies. We can have biased data, also on studies that look at the impact of immigrants on the economy and cultural realm, etc., of the host country. And Norway, why we use Norway? Norway is in Northern Europe. It's a rather small country. It's not part of the European Union. It has about 5.5 million people, and about 15% of the immigrants, of the population is immigrants, first generation immigrants, so it's quite a bit. I mean, there are about 800,000 people, but because it's a small country, that it's a large percentage. It's a very rich country because actually they discovered oil in the late 60s, and since the 80s, these petroleum activities contributed significantly to the economic growth of the country and to supporting the welfare state that they have. It's also one of the handful of countries that have registers, and so they document everything about, not everything, but they document a lot of facts about their population, whether it's immigrants or natives. So we know who is entering, we know who is born in the country, and we know who is exiting the country, because they have to deregister when they go abroad for more than a year, say. And we also know where they go, so we have destination country. And this is really valuable and unique. You don't find that for many countries. For the US, for example, we have no such information. And so we have national representative longitudinal data. And here come the theories of labor migration. Yes, you have a question?
did they select the destination?
So people have to go and deregister, which means that they go to the authorities, right? Or they write to them or something, and they say, now I will leave. And they ask them, you know, where are you going? So we know whether they go back or they go to a third country.
Seem to be pretty permanent. I mean, I could see someone just going home, but never coming back, never formally leaving.
Never telling them? Right, so that could be, from what they tell me, it's a rather remote or very small possibility, because if they are not deregistered, they keep paying taxes. They have to, you know, they're liable for certain things. Sometimes I've heard that maybe natives, for example, they might not deregister when they go abroad because they still want to be part of something, or, whatever reasons for taxes, so there are very, very few cases, but normally people will deregister. If you are an immigrant and you don't deregister, it's, how do you come back? So it's, they have really good records. And so one more thing. So we have self-registration, where people go and they report that. And then we have administrative registration. If people do not report it, within a year they find out, the authorities, because they will, see whether you paid taxes or what happened to the record. And then probably with a year delay, we have a record administratively that these people left. Yes?
Just, I guess, at the same point, the destination country, but it's never verified. So when you deregister, you declare, this is my new destination, and they end up going.
No, they say, I have information that they went to, New Zealand or something.
How does Norway figure out if you actually get it?
Yeah, right. But why would they? I mean, they could not say it, I have missing values, but I don't see why anybody would lie going somewhere, right? So, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, if somebody lies, you would assume they would lie everywhere to all the facts. But I think that's the thing with the data, there's always a little bit of error here and there. And with regressions and looking at the mean, we kind of, even out things of the outliers. So neoclassical economics started to explain the massive emigration in the 19th century pertaining to permanent moves of people from less developed countries to more developed countries. We have macro and micro. They're both based on wage differentials. And as I said, they assume a permanent migration. The people go and they never return. And then we have in the 80s the new economics of labor migration by Oded Stark. This is a completely different theory. This assumes that people, again, are from less developed countries, but they go out in a temporary, with a temporary idea. They're target savers, so they go to a specific country for a specific purpose to, earn this much amount of money and then go back. And then we have these other theories, which unfortunately I will not be able to cover today. I'm still working with data to be able to test these other theories, like labor market segmentation, which is like the guest workers, the Roy model and Borjas with the income distributions, and the gravity model, which I can also do because I know the countries and their proximity to Norway. The premises are quickly, the individual decides to exit. And this is based on the individual's income maximization over the lifetime. The individual performs a cost-benefit analysis and does not remit. Earnings are very important and actually necessary and sufficient. And the underlying assumption is that people always maximize, so they will always move to countries that have higher earnings, and they can be rewarded for their human capital, subject to transferability. So in this theory, we don't find direct predictions about who is more likely to return, like the selection of characteristics. But return, as the philosophy of the theory is that return doesn't happen because this is a permanent move abroad. People go abroad, they do better for themselves, and they stay there. So those who will return will be necessarily negatively selected. Say, there will be those who are unemployed or who have no money or they've never managed to do well. There will be the newcomers who see that they cannot, stay in the new country, that they don't have the fortitude, for example, to stay, or they suffer from other psychological or cultural shocks. And the human capital theory within the neoclassical economics, which can predict very well the initial emigration, and explain selectivity. It's also not so good when it goes to the emigration from the host country of the first generation immigrants. But we can derive some predictions that we believe are in line with the idea of the theory, of the philosophy of the theory. And when it goes to onward migration, we see that there are similarities. We can apply neoclassical economics because we assume that onward migration is, again, for higher earnings, for something better to maximize. And in the new economics of labor migration, we have temporary migration. It's pre-planned. Here is the family that is the unit that decides. The family sits around the fireplace, so to speak, and they say we have to diversify risk. And so they send several of their sons in different places to earn enough money, and then they come back to improve the life of the entire family back home. So return is part of an optimal location plan over the life cycle. Circular movement is possible, so people can go back and forth. So for example, they can go abroad, earn the amount that it's enough, they go back home, and then back home, because relative position is important, they might decide that they have to go back again to get more money, to be back and be relatively well off like their neighbors. Immigrants are target savers, as I said. Income differentials are not necessary. Human capital is irrelevant. They don't go to invest in their human capital, and they're not rewarded for human capital. These people will do any job they find, so long as they can reach the amount of money they wanted. So we would expect these people to be positively selected. So those who will return, they will be the ones who made it and they managed to get the target savings. They will be negatively selected with respect to the attachment in the labor market. For example, they will only return when they're unemployed. And the status and prestige on the job are not important, as I said, human capital, because the absolute and relative position in the income distribution in the home country is very important for them. And of course, the notion of the relative deprivation is also very important for them, which triggers a new migration. So here comes this table where I tried to put these words that I said already into plus and minuses. So on the left column, I have the variables or the characteristics that I have available. And then the plus and minuses is what the theory predicts, it will happen. And 0 means that the theory has no prediction. That would be no effect. So for example, as I said, occupational prestige will have no effect on the probability to return. under the Nelm theory. So for example, as I said, those who are employed are less likely to go back under both theories. If you look at earnings, the neoclassical theory would say less likely to return, so we have a negative, because they're well off, they're doing well, so they stay abroad. But the other theory says they're more likely to return because it's those who earn the most and achieve their target that will return. So this is how it goes from what I already said, and from what we've read, and from what we understand the theories predict. Here's in Norway, for example, it's a minus for the neoclassical theory, because if people return, they will return in the beginning, within the first years. So the longer they stay in Norway, the less likely they are to return, and they become more permanent abroad. But for the new economics of labor migration, years-in migration do not have an effect, because these people are target savers. So whatever it takes, how many years it takes to gather, this amount, it will take so many years. Yes.
How does the Norway so Norway stands out by having a very generous welfare state. I suspect it operates that you're not eligible for most benefits for some time, and if you're there long enough, eligible, which in some ways must create a huge disincentive for people that to help.
Right.
You're going to go to Norway for a little bit before you get eligibility, and if you stay there long enough, you don't want to leave because you
right. So I'll jump and I'll come back. I'll jump ahead to here. Okay. So public transfers receive welfare. So we think that the theory of the neoclassical economics says that they will be more likely to return, because although they receive these benefits, they're sort of the people who never made it. They're not doing really well abroad, so they will be most likely to return.
The benefits you don't get to receive, you acquire entitlement. So at some point in Norway, and then you become entitled to a range of benefits, from paid maternity leave to healthcare coverage, and some of the retirement benefits. So anyway, I suspect the more time you are in Norway, the more you get entitlements.
Right, but we think more strictly about the letter of the law, so to speak, the letter of the theory, and not the, so the idea is that you go abroad, you do well, and you stay abroad forever. If you manage to get entitlements, that's good, and you can leave okay, but that's not enough. That's not with the theory. The theory says that if you're not well off, if you don't earn enough, if you're not fully employed, you will more likely return. But I'd love to discuss this further.
And building on kind of these generational transfer, we would argue that entitlement value is a very big component of the rule as well. And so it seems ignoring entitlement or transfer value to get to systems is a very big part of the individual life cycle income and wealth trajectory.
Right. So I can definitely see this other point, and that would be, I think, a very good idea to discuss it and add it in the paper, because there are these other cases, and this case that you mentioned is, there are a few people like that. It's not just one exception. So we need to think about that again. Thank you for that point. As I said, we're sort of brainstorming, and we're sort of, still thinking about the effect of or the direction of the effect. So let me go back and show you the effect on the onward migration. this is totally new. We're just coming up with these ideas. Again, for onward migration has similarities with the initial migration in neoclassical economics because you go for income maximization. The other theory doesn't really say anything about onward migration, but it's possible.
How do you define onward migration? How do you define onward migration?
They declare that they go to another country. So I know where they're from and if they return, and then I know that they go to a third country, which is not their own country.
Oh.
So I mean.
So like a step migration, they go.
Yeah, so I have people from Poland, and when they do not return, when they say they exit, they say they go to.
So Norway was a step.
Russia.
Yeah, Norway was a step to get to Russia.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but it could also be that they changed some kind of a plan. They somehow found out that in Russia there are better opportunities to become richer. You know, their earnings would be higher or their human capital would be more rewarded. They're both cases, but because I know where they go, and I can compare with the home country, I can tell where they're going onward. The earnings, for example, right, for onward migration, we would expect that higher earnings, those who have higher earnings, they will be more likely to go onward because they would want more earnings, because it's always because of wage differentials, so they will go abroad. No, I said an example about Poles. The majority actually of first-generation immigrants in Norway are from Poland. So I brought this example that maybe the Poles don't want to return to Poland, but they want to go to Russia, as an example. Or they want to go to the UK, right? Yeah, and the zeros actually, as I said, show that we expect no effect, but there could be an effect if they have any ideas. You know, we can adapt cases, but so far this is how, from our thinking, this is what we predict. Yes.
So I still don't understand. So I'm a Pole, came to Norway, and then the question is, what happens when my earnings go up in Norway, not in Russia, in Norway?
In Norway, yes.
And the plus sign says, my earnings go up in Norway, therefore I'm more likely to go in Russia.
So under the scheme of the neoclassical economics, where the agents are income maximizers at every time, it's like people are on the look, they're more opportunistic.
Right.
And the moment they learn that in Russia, you know, they're more.
That's not that sign. This is not the talking about earnings in Russia. It's talking about earnings in Norway.
Yes.
I think that was
higher
what
in Norway, I'm less likely to go to Russia.
What it's saying is about the selectivity. I mean, it's not that the earnings go up, but they have higher earnings compared to other immigrants. So this should be in terms of selectivity. Like the ones that are doing better in Norway might be looking for more opportunities. Like that. It's not that they're moving up and then they decide to just change. So they're highly selective. You're saying that, you know.
Right. So maybe Russia is an unfortunate example. The idea with that, the way we understand the theory, is that if you're an income maximizer and you have human capital, you're always on the look for something better.
I agree. But that refers to the earnings in the third destination, call it the US.
Right.
Whatever. But when the earnings go up in Norway, it's less likely the earnings in the third destination are higher, not more likely. So it's less.
Yes.
But that's not
Yes.
change in income, it's just net income positive selection into onward migration, which suggests that it's those of the, able to command the highest incomes.
Are more likely to circulate and go for higher income over and over.
So it's not people struggling,
And
it's successful people who are leaving, which suggests some sort of
yeah.
ability.
And the same with education, I would say. Like we hear lately for the last couple of years about the circulation of talents, the highly skilled, the STEM immigrants, they're more in demand and they go to several places because they're able to command higher wages. So we would expect the most educated to jump and go to another country to be better off. That's the idea. You want me to continue? Or?
Yes,
yeah. Okay, yes. So at the end. Okay, so this is the idea. Again, let me touch upon some other things. Attachments to Norway or to the host country, they are, if you are attached in Norway because you have family there or because you became a citizen of the country or you have home, you bought a house there, all these go into the more permanent migration into that country. So once you have all these attachments, the neoclassical theory says you're less likely to return home, right? But the new economics of labor migration says you're more likely to return when you have a spouse in Norway and less likely to return when you have children. And the idea is that you go abroad to earn this amount of money and go back. And if your spouse comes with you abroad, the spouse, in a traditional way, can help you focus in the labor market, by doing, say, household chores, taking care of the children, or even by working and providing a second income. And so you get to gather or achieve the target amount faster, so then you're more likely to return. And by the same token, having children abroad takes away, they're expensive. You have to spend money for the children, for their education, their clothes, and so on and so forth. So this takes away from the savings that you have, that to return back home. So it will take you longer to stay abroad to get that amount of target money. That's the idea. And so for age, okay, as we said, the older people, it's sort of one exception where the neoclassical theory says, maybe if you're very old and it's the Salmon effect, then you go back to the home country. So we put a plus sign there. But for the new economics of migration, there's no effect. It doesn't talk about age at all. It's again, target saving and back. So when it goes to the onward migration, again, you see many zeros. We're still debating about that, and please help us out. If you are, say, a homeowner in Norway or a Norwegian citizen, then neoclassical economics would say that you're less likely to go away to a third country because you are permanently in Norway. But if you are a citizen, that can open doors for you. It could be the transit people who always wanted to go somewhere else, but say having the Pakistani passport just does not permit them to go to a third country. But once they become Norwegian citizens, they can go to more places. So they will be more likely to exit. And that we have found out with many immigrant populations. Once they become immigrants, once they become citizens, they're more likely to exit. In my work about Turks in Germany, we used to say, if you want the Turks to leave Germany, give them a passport, because then, the feeling that the immigrants have that they can always go back to Germany, it is very important to immigrants. And so having the passport gives them this opportunity to, in case things change, they can always go back. And what other example I should use? So yeah, the public transfers we discussed, it's possible that if you live off of welfare and you can, and you find a better place, then you will be more likely to leave and go somewhere else for better, you know, to have a full-time job with full benefits. But the other theory does not really predict how it will go. Okay, so this is sort of the theory. Now the data, they're from Statistics Norway. The sample we use for this paper is first-generation immigrants from 2015 to 2020. They're aged 20 to 65. They arrived in Norway after 1990 because the laws changed and we have information. Before 1990, we don't really have the information we need for many things. And we only choose labor migrants since we're testing these economic theories. So when people arrive, there is a category with the authorities and they say, you know, I came for family reunification, I came for asylum, I came for education, or I came for labor. And so we chose only those who said, I came for labor. And the Nordics, because for the Nordics, the authorities are, you know, more nonchalant, so to speak. You know, there are many missing observations there. They're not very strict, but they all know that the Nordics go for work. So we include them as labor migrants, even though we don't find the labor option for them. So we end up with 282,000 first-generation immigrants, and 40,000 of them have emigrated during these years we're looking at. We use person years observations because we conduct an event history analysis. So there we have three categories. We have the stayers, the returnees, and the onward movers. It's very interesting to me that, and that would probably be our next paper, that 92% of our samples stay. And this happens in many countries. We always talk about return migration and onward and all that because immigrants move and they do return. But always, if we look at every country, immigrant country, we find that the majority of immigrants stay in that country. It's almost like the steady state for immigrants. The returnees in our sample are only 7%. And the majority of the immigrants who exit, who return, are the Nordics. And for the onward movers, it's only 1% of our sample, and 19% of the Nordics go onward. They usually return.
But I thought you said, can you show me the previous about the percent who returned, the previous slide?
Oh, it was the first slide from other.
Yeah, this one, no, that one. But the numbers down there.
Yeah, this is real numbers. These are real persons.
Yeah, so here the percent that return is.
This is emigrated. It's everybody.
Immigrated and 40,000 went back.
Yes, but not back. 40,000 is everybody who exit.
Oh.
It's exit.
But then you say that 92% stay, and then this percent, that's a much lower percent than this percentage here.
40,000 is about 14–15%.
14, 15. I hear you say
Percent of person years.
So
yeah.
when you put in person years, it gives you 92%. But isn't the number?
Yeah, I think you're right. I have to. I should better calculate it in regular people, in observations and not in person years.
Because they have more years in Norway, less years afterwards. So it's not the percent of people who return. It's that first one, 282. You know, it's 15–20%. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's a lot
That's
more
a very
return
good point.
than what
Yeah.
person here is telling you.
Yeah, yeah, it's error. Yeah, it shows, yeah. Well, nonetheless, in relative terms, there are differences.
No, I know it's,
so-
I mean, yeah, no, but it's interesting.
Yeah. So the methodology is a standard event history analysis to take care of the heterogeneity of every year as people change their characteristics. And so we have a multinomial logit. Probability to stay is the base, the comparison group, and then is the probability to return and the probability to move onward. We have all these theoretical variables that I talked about, and we include other demographics and controls. And here means and standard deviations, because customarily we show that, but this is a rather ugly thing. So I will not go through, because for every of the three categories of immigrants, I look at non-Nordics and Nordics, and then, and so it's just raw data anyway. It will be in the paper, but I don't think it's worth talking about now. But briefly, when I look at the stayers, I see that the non-Nordics are older. They're males, they're married, they have children, they're homeowners. They're at least 6 years in Norway. They have lower education and receive public transfers. But again, this is just raw data, right? The Nordics are sort of similar. They're older and married and have children. They're homeowners. They're more years in Norway. They have high school education. They receive public transfers, but they also work full time and they have the higher earnings. I mean, that's what the means say. And so it goes on for, I do that for the others, but let me move on to the multinomial logit results. Okay, so here it is, a little window there. It's, and I don't see that. I don't think it's significant. Okay, so we have the probability to return versus stay, and then the probability to move on versus stay. And I do that for these two different groups, the Nordics and the non-Nordics. Eventually, I have to separate the non-Nordics into different groups as well. So for example, you know, I should have just the Europeans, maybe the US, Canada, and Australia, and then I put the non-EU people or something like that. Depending on the information I have, because now non-Nordics are, you know, very different people in there. So let me go to what I have summarized here. And so this is the determinants in writing and in comparison to the theories, rather than looking at the table. And this is for non-Nordics and Nordics. So first of all, we see that older age deters return. Okay, so this is not the neoclassical theory, and it's not the Nelm. Neoclassical theory says that older people will return. The new economics of migration says it has no effect. Then having children, people are less likely to return in both samples. Homeowners and citizens are less likely to return for both samples. This is in line with neoclassical theory. Having less than 5 and less than 10 years of migration in Norway, so the newcomers, in other words, are more likely to return, as the theory says, compared to those who have more years abroad. Those who have less than high school or high school are less likely to return, but those who have post-secondary, post-university education are more likely to return. This is something that we cannot explain. You know, the theory, the neoclassical theory says that so long as there are wage differentials, you don't go back to the home country. You do not return. And you do not return when you have very high education, because your home country is not able to take care of you and to appreciate your high education. So there are some oddities here that we find, and we have to explain that. So full-time, part-time are in accordance to the NELM, but not the neoclassical theory. Earnings is something interesting. So higher earnings, we found a positive and significant sign for earnings. So higher earnings for the non-Nordics increase the probability to return. And this is not what neoclassical theory says. Neoclassical theory says that if you're successful, you stay abroad, you don't return. But this is what the NELMs say. They say once you have high earnings, then you go back. When we look at the Nordics, it's another oddity. We do not find that earnings have a significant effect. So earnings have really no effect on the probability to return. And yeah, we're not sure why. And then I move on to the determinants to move on versus stay, the second part of the multinomial, and I do it again by non-Nordics and Nordics. So here we find that older age deters onward migration. This would be in accordance with neoclassical theory, because you're supposed to migrate and take advantage of higher earnings when you're young. But age has no effect at all for the Nordics. So already we see that there are a little bit of different dynamics for the Nordics. They don't follow exactly the theories we discuss. But there are also commonalities, like being married is less likely makes you less likely to move on to a third country. Homeowners are less likely to move on, as the neoclassical theory predicts. And those who have less than 5 and less than 10 years in Norway, the newcomers again, are more likely to move on. That's consistent with neoclassical theory, because people decide early on whether it's worth their while to stay in the host country or move on or return. High school and less than high school, people are less likely to move on, but when they have post-university education, are more likely to return. This is a nice result. We like that because it goes with the circulation of talents. So the highly educated are in demand and they can go around. Full-time, part-time people are less likely to move on compared to those who are unemployed. And this is not what the neoclassical theory says, but when they are in training, they're more likely to move on. Approximately, yeah, more or less the same is true for Nordics. And then look at the earnings. So having higher earnings and having capital gains increase the probability to move on, which is in line with neoclassical theory, but not the NELM. For Nordics is the same thing. And then public transfers are only significant for the non-Nordics, not the Nordics. And if you receive public transfers, we find that you are less likely to move on. But when you receive unemployment benefits, you're more likely to move on. So these are our results. And then we also did a binomial logit to look at the third category. So we only look at those who, the exiters, the emigrants altogether, not the stayers. And then we look at the probability to choose to return versus move onwards. And I have some results here as well. we're still thinking about that because it's a different, we have to come up with a different explanation of the theories when you make this choice. It's not, you know, the theory does not talk about that, theories. So older people are less likely to return. Males are more likely to return. When I don't have it for Nordic means it was not significant at all. So I only discuss the significant results. So homeowners and citizens are less likely to return versus moving onwards. So they might move onwards. So this is in accordance with neoclassical theory. The newcomers are more likely to return compared to the more permanent people. Those who have less than high school and high school are more likely to return versus moving onwards. But post-university education, those who have post-university education are more likely to return. This is a little bit at odds with the previous results, but this makes us think that return migration or emigration is a lot contextual and depends on the data. So the foregone choice, like we say in economics, right? When you choose to exit as opposed to stay, staying is your foregone choice. So this choice that you didn't choose makes a difference, right? So when we compared return to stay, we found the opposite result. Now that we compare return to onwards, we find different result for the highly skilled. Again, higher earnings is another interesting result. We find that higher earnings decrease the probability to return versus moving onwards, right? So maybe goes to your point that you know, those who are rich are more likely to move to another country. And the same for Nordics. And receiving public transfers increases the probability to return, but social assistance decreases return. And yeah, so in summary, we find that the theories apply partially, not totally, not to all variables, not to all characteristics. Sometimes they apply well to one group, like the Nordics, but they do not apply well to the non-Nordics. And some oddities are about the earnings, especially of the Nordics, and the age when we look at Nordics and non-Nordics. Okay, so human migration is very complex and depends on many observable and non-observable factors. Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, you had a question.
I'm not sure why, like in classical theory, they are like memoryless, so it doesn't matter where you are, they like assume you will move where the wage differential is higher. So if you can earn more in other place, you will move there. So I don't understand why it doesn't allow you to make predictions about onward migration or return migration. So it's a condition of the fact that you are in Norway now. You can treat the other like movement as a new migration. And so like the other usual things would apply. If earnings arrive in the place where you want to move or go back to, you would move.
Yeah.
I think some of those you at least for being classical. Even in the other case, I think by treating the new movement.
Right. So we agree that moving to a third country is very similar to like the first move in the theory of the neoclassical theory. However, those who never migrated before and they make the first move are not the same people as the emigrants who have already migrated and they consider a second or a third. So it's not exactly adoptable. You know, we can make an argument, and the argument is, like you said, if you're always an income maximizer, then you always pursue that. And this is how it's going to be. Yeah, you're right in that sense, yeah. Yeah, or, sorry, yeah.
So a lot of the theories from the neoclassical stuff, like, very interesting. They're from like almost the 1990s, and there's many ideas in behavioral economics about, you know, risk-return trade-offs, that people do not behave optimally, they don't grab all the lotteries. And the major puzzle in immigration economics, as I see it, is why don't more people move? And I'm curious if in your literature you've seen any attempt to integrate all of the theories we have on, like, from finance, why people don't trade enough, into some of this, why don't people move enough? I think when I think of alternatives to neoclassical, that would be where my mind jumps, not necessarily the gravity and these other kinds of non-behavioral phenomena. Okay, does that make sense?
So you're saying that financial motives are important in the decision to go somewhere?
Yeah, and there's many models of behavioral agents where they don't make, so the major phenomenon I'm curious about is maybe why don't enough people migrate? That's kind of the first puzzle in some ways when you try to estimate these things.
Yeah.
Like the almost absolute level rather than the qualitative thing is like the first puzzle. And to me, there are many ideas from behavioral economics about why people don't engage in enough transactions, these kinds of frictions. And I have seen very little attempt to integrate any of the frictions in this now gigantic literature into immigration economics. And I'm wondering if you've seen anything on that, or if that's kind of...
No, I haven't. And I thank you for saying that, because it just happened. I'm lucky enough, we're lucky enough to have information about capital gains. Where is this? See, here I have information whether they have positive capital gains, negative, and zero. And I can use that. I added it as part of being rich and having wealth, you know, as part of earnings, you know, following the same idea. But now you're proposing something else, that those by themselves could be a strong enough motive to change the probabilities of relocation. So I have not read these papers. I have to familiarize myself with that, and that would be a great addition. To this day, as you all know, there is not a unified theory about emigration or return migration. So what we do, those of us who do this kind of research, is that we add a bunch of variables or characteristics, and we say, you know, if you have friends, then this is networks, that covers the networks theory, and if you have, you know, this variable, that covers this theory, and, right? Or we can add, say, democracy or polity, freedom of each country, and then you add other theories that, you know, they change the behavior of people to go back and forth. But so far, we just stayed on these two theories. But thank you.
One final quick question.
I'm not sure it's quick, but so the legal context is remarkably missing in what you've done. So migration is tightly regulated, and you treat as if everybody in your analysis had the options to stay unconditionally. And I guess my first question is that correct, or are some people restricted? They have to be, if their visa expires or their visa is tied to their employment, and they need to leave because they lose jobs. So
this is from what I know. From my co-authors, this is mostly for asylum seekers or other types of status upon arrival. Those who are labor migrants have a more permanent status. Yeah, it's easier to become...
But that must be then a very restricted set of subsets to migrants into Norway, because I can't imagine, there must be a sizable subset of migrants
Yeah.
Norway as well as other countries that face a much more restricted.
Do you have visa status in the data set? Do you happen to have that? Do they collect that? I mean, it's a black box in migration, you know, like nobody has data on the legal status of immigrants and that. So, you know, as you know, the 1 year extra after the student, whether your visa status can affect this, but I know they have it. But.
I don't have it. I have where they're from, and of course the citizenship. I know if they have kept their own citizenship, and I know if they became Norwegians. And I know what I said, you know, they came for labor, family reunification, asylum seekers, education. So, you know, family and education are probably, you know, disguises for labor as well. People will move into labor, the labor market. The asylum people I cannot include, they're a completely different group. So, yeah, well, we'll look into that, but you're right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Exit.